What's going on? You're listening to episode 3 of the Point to Point NHL Recap Show. I'm Pascal Pryor, joined by the one, the only, Mark Hallerlack. Mark, how you doing this week, buddy?
Not too bad, buddy. Just getting over some sickness, watching a pretty good amount of hockey here. It's a pretty exciting start of the season. Obviously, got some parity going on. We're going to get into it in this episode, but I'm excited to get going here for episode number 3.
I know you're excited. This first news, though, you can't be too excited about. It's the Kirby Dach injury. He'll be out for the whole season due to an ACL and MCL tears in his right leg. How big of a loss is this for the Canadians right now?
Man, we talked about this in like the pre-season talk, right? How I was saying how it's going to be a year for watching the young players grow and develop. And there's a guy that you're not going to be seeing anything from him now for the rest of the season. Really sucks, man. I thought he had a really strong first game against the Leafs. He had 2 assists. Even looked pretty good earlier against Chicago before he got hurt in that game when he got hit into the bench there by Jared Tenorti. Just kind of unfortunate, man. Like, it's like he was just hit into the bench. It was a big hit. His leg kind of got caught, I guess. And you could tell right when he got up, he was just gliding around on his left leg. He was not putting any pressure on that right leg whatsoever. Definitely knew something was wrong. Would not have expected him to be out for the entire season, though. Honestly, I just hope he's able to recover and come back stronger than ever next season because he's been an exciting player to watch ever since he's came over to Montreal. Kind of love watching him develop and grow. He's a great skater for his size as well. So I'm just kind of wishing him the best, and hopefully this team will still be able to be watchable because without him the last couple of games, it's just kind of sucked a little bit.
See, for Montreal, it sucks, but it's not the end of the world because right now they're in a position where you want to lose and you want to get that top overall pick. So it doesn't hurt them in that sense where you're not going to be winning games and you're not going to be making a playoff push because they weren't going to do that and they don't want to do that anyways. But where it hurts them the most is in his growth as a player because this is now his second pretty big injury in the NHL. Of course, he had that broken wrist at the World Juniors in his sophomore season. And that year, he only played 18 games. But when he came over to Montreal last year, it looked like he was really going to start to break out and become the player we all thought he was going to be when he was drafted. And now he's 22 years old, so he still has a lot of room to grow, but missing this season is going to be huge for him because after what he did last season, we all thought this season he was going to take that next step up and really become that second line center in Montreal. And now he just won't be able to do that. So I think that's where it hurts Montreal and him the most. But this stuff happens, as you were saying. Hopefully he can come back stronger than ever. We saw it with McDavid. Like McDavid, I was watching the documentary on his injury to his knee a couple years ago, and like some of the doctors were saying that they didn't think he would ever even like play again. And look at what he did last season, right? So these injuries aren't as bad as what they were like 10, 15, 20 years ago where they're like possibly career ending, but it definitely sucks to see a young player of his caliber get hit with one of these injuries. Another player though that sort of had a similar injury and is in a similar place in their career as he is Gabe Vilardi of the Winnipeg Jets. He suffered an MCL sprain on Tuesday against his former team, Los Angeles Kings, and he'll be out 4 to 6 weeks. What does this mean for the Winnipeg Jets?
It's definitely, I think, a harder blow for the Jets than it is the Canadians right now, even though like Dach is out way longer than Vilardi. But Winnipeg's in a place where they want to compete, right? And they want to make the playoffs. And this is a guy who's come in and he's supposed to be sort of their Pierre-Luc Dubois replacement, right? They're at their second line center right now, and they're going to not be having him for 4 to 6 weeks. I think it's going to be a pretty big blow for the Winnipeg Jets, to be honest. They don't really have a guy to replace him in that slot. I'm assuming like Adam Lowry's going to jump up from that 3C to take that role. Maybe he'll be able to play as a 2C for short term, but I'm not convinced that he's a top 6 player whatsoever. I actually think Dach and Vilardi are kind of similar type of like player trajectory so far in their career. They both maybe took a little bit longer to start to like break out a little bit. Like Vilardi had 20 goals last year. They're both like high first round picks as well. You know what I mean? Recently got moved. I think they both have that like really good second line center ceiling as well. I think this is a big blow for him and for the team. Obviously, he's had a little bit of injury history as well. You hope it's nothing too serious, and you hope even when he comes back, like he can stay healthy. As much as I'm not a fan of the Jets, I really like Vilardi in his game, and I'm kind of curious to see where he can take it this year. Maybe even missing 4 to 6 weeks, he can put up 20, 25 goals still. So, I mean, big blow for the Winnipeg Jets, to be quite honest with you, but hoping he can come back stronger than ever, just like Dach.
Yeah, it's definitely not as bad as the Dach situation, but overall, it's pretty similar as you were saying, where they have pretty similar trajectories. Pardon me. Of course, Vilardi is a couple years older. He's 24 compared to Dach, who's 22. But yeah, Vilardi broke out last year with the Kings. He put up 41 points. It was a career high for him. Previously, his career high was 23 points. So he had a really big season last year. And of course, this season, we thought he was going to take another step up, similar to Dach. And at least he will be able to play still majority of the season, unlike Dach. But it still sucks to see a player get injured like this, especially against a former team and like your revenge match against them. Like he had to be, when he went down, he had to be feeling terrible, just knowing that this was a team that passed by on him, and now he's getting injured against them. As
Yeah.
much as much as I've been ripping Ottawa so far this season and their management and the decisions they're making, I gotta hand it to them on this one. I think this is all around great by the organization. So Craig Anderson, of course, at the end of last year with Buffalo, he announced his retirement, but now he's going to be signing a 1-day deal to retire with the Ottawa Senators. He spent 10 seasons with the Senators, posting a 202, 168, and 46 record with them. And in 2016, 2017, he won the Bill Masterson Trophy. The other thing with him is he is Ottawa's all-time leader among goaltenders in games played at 435. Second on the list, had just above 200 games played. So it's not even close there. How do you feel about this move by Ottawa and like the whole 1-day signing retirement thing that goes on in professional sports right now?
Personally, I don't mind the 1-day contract thing to end your career with a certain team, especially if you were playing elsewhere. Like obviously he was in Buffalo the last couple seasons there. Like you said, he spent a lot of time in Ottawa. I'm going to be honest with you. I think Craig Anderson was probably one of the most underrated goalies of this generation, to be quite honest. I think he was super solid. I wouldn't say he showed flashness of eliteness, but I think in accordance to like consistency, like he was so good for Ottawa for so long, man. All those save percentages are up like 929. He's in the 910s. You know what I mean? Even the lower 900s when like Ottawa wasn't the greatest team at times either, right? He kind of had that different kind of style where he was more of like a stand-up guy. He loved to play the puck a lot, you know what I mean? But especially in that run where Ottawa went to the conference finals, I think it was it may have been 2017, the year he won that Bill Masterton trophy. Remember, his wife got diagnosed with
Yeah.
cancer. They went on that run to the conference finals. He was unbelievable in that playoffs. You know what I mean? So I really like this for the Ottawa Senators. They obviously got the new owner coming in. I'm sure he's got a huge say in that as well. He probably knows what the history of the team. I'm sure, obviously, Daniel Alfredson, I don't know if you saw, he's been at the last couple games. He seems like he's taken a role with the team. Well, I'm sure he had some influence over this decision as well. I think this is awesome for Craig Anderson. He's always seemed like such a good guy as well. And I think he's one of the more underrated goalies of this generation. I don't think he was really given that respect as like a really good starting goaltender. Meanwhile, like he showed it a lot. So I really like this for the Senators, and I'm really happy for him.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the nail that he was one of the most underrated goalies of that generation. I actually had a question for you. I was going to ask you, but you beat me to it. I was going to say, out of that generation of goalies, where do you rank them? But like as you were saying, he was never that elite caliber goaltender, but he was always just so consistent and meant so much to the team he was playing behind. And
It's
he's
just like
definitely,
it'd be better with him if you had a really solid backup goalie, but like he showed times where he could play like 60 games, you know what I mean? Like 55, 60 games, and he can give you those starting goalie numbers and be really solid for you, you know what I mean? But I don't think you can put him on the same level as like your Lundqvist, your Carey
yeah.
Prices, you know what I mean? But like I think he's like a tier maybe two below, but still like really good, and a goalie that I think a lot of teams would have liked to have over the years.
When I was thinking about it, a comparison I sort of had in my mind from like this a similar time in an era as well was Braden Holtby, because Braden Holtby was also a guy who was never elite, but always that really, really good goaltender and just below, pardon me, those elite goaltenders in the NHL.
Right.
But all around, I love the move by Ottawa. I think they're really just doing this right. And for the players like signing the 1-day contracts to retire with the organization. I know a lot of people aren't the biggest fans on it, but I don't see what's wrong with it. Like this guy spent 10 seasons with the Senators, was a massive part of their community there. Of course, you mentioned his wife having cancer and how much went on that season. Like, if the guy wants to retire and really be remembered as an Ottawa Senator, what's wrong with that, right?
Right.
Like imagine Crosby or Ovechkin being traded and then them not retiring as a Pittsburgh Penguin or Washington Capital. Like that just it wouldn't seem right at all.
And I think with Craig, I totally agree with that. I think with Craig Anderson too is he had the longevity, right? Like he started in the NHL in 2002, and like he's just retiring after last season, right? So he spent a lot of time in this league. Obviously, he played like 709 regular season games. Like for a goalie, that is a lot,
That's a lot
man.
of games, yeah.
Like they always say, like 1,000 games for a player is like equivalent to like 500 games for a goalie. You know what I mean? Because as a goalie, obviously you're not participating in every single game, right? Starters are in that 55 to 60 range now. So I think he's got the longevity as well. If you look through his career save percentages, like twice he was in like the 800s. Like, you know what I mean? He's just like the model of consistency, I think. He has that older type of style with the stand-up, but I mean, I think you got to give respect where it's due, and I'm happy for Anderson.
So this next player we're going to talk about, honestly, we haven't heard much about him over the last month or so. Patty Kane. So he remains on track to return some point in the next month. Of course, he had that hip resurfacing surgery in June, so he's been recovering from that. But I think he should be signing with the team over the next month and a half or so. Like, I don't think we'll have to wait too much longer to sort of see what's going on with that situation and where he's going to go. What do you think about the whole situation with him right now?
So yeah, obviously like his agent put out that video or whatever like a month or two ago about him training and seeing like the progress he's made since that surgery so far. Obviously it's been like besides that, like it's been pretty quiet on most parts besides like Friedman just reporting once about how I don't think he's going to sign until he's fully healthy, right? He's still got probably about like a month left before he's cleared. I don't know if it's more or less he doesn't want to make a decision and then that team's not performing or whatever. And I'm not really too sure. Obviously, for him, there's going to be kind of limited options in accordance for him making a lot of money if he wants to go to a contender just because of how tight teams are to the cap. I saw something interesting on 32 Thoughts a couple days ago. Someone said, is Patrick Kane waiting until November 19th to sign this contract because on November 19th, he will be 35 and then he can sign a 35 plus deal, which would give him performance bonuses, which is really interesting because a couple players do that right now. And one that comes to mind is Joe Pavelski with Dallas. Apparently, the way it works is that once July 1st hits, whatever age you are on that day and you sign that contract, that's what it is. So if Kane wants to get the 35 plus deal, it's going to be signed for him next summer. So that's kind of out of the question. I'm really curious to see where he's going to go. I'm sure he's going to take some sort of like 1-year deal, maybe a 2-year deal. Honestly, at this point, is it crazy to say he's going to be making like under $2 million? Like, where is he going to go? Honestly, the only team where I can see where he might get a little bit more is if he decides to go to Buffalo because they have like $8 million in cap. He's from there. You know what I mean? They obviously haven't got off to the great start. Maybe he won't go there. But say he ends up going to a team like Toronto or even the Rangers, goes back to the Rangers. Like, they don't have cap space, man. Like, what are they going to do? Like, he's going to have to take $1 million and then potentially have like a games played bonus or like some sort of point bonus. You know what I mean? I'm curious to see where this goes. Obviously, he had a down year last year, especially point production wise compared to the rest of his career. Like the year before last, he put up 92 points, right? So I'm really curious to see if he has rebounded from this injury and he's going to be like back to normal Patty Kane and he can really help out a team and potentially lead them to a Stanley Cup.
Yeah, you mentioned Buffalo. I think Buffalo is the perfect fit for him because they have the money right now. They're a team that they aren't a champion, like they aren't a Stanley Cup contender, but they could be a dark horse there. And if you add Patty Kane to that team, who knows what type of run they could go on if they get in the playoffs, especially if Devin Levi gets hot in the playoffs. So for me, I think Buffalo makes the most sense for him. Are there any other teams though around the league where you think he'd be a good fit? Because you mentioned Toronto, New York as well, but for Toronto, like even if he's taking a league minimum deal, I don't even see how Toronto would really make that work.
Yeah, they're so tight to the cap, right? Like they've been running like a 20-player roster instead of 23 just to be under that cap for the first couple games, right? And also like having Fraser Minton up from junior as well has helped that cap situation. I don't know, man. I don't see this. I've heard rumors of Detroit to go back with DeBrincat and he'll play with Larkin. I mean, that would be a nasty first line, to be honest, but I just don't see him going there. Like, it's just like at that point, it's like, why don't you just go to Buffalo? Like, you know what I mean? Like, you're from there. They're in like the kind of the same stages of their, what I guess you can call it a rebuild now. They're both trying to make the playoffs. Detroit's kind of had a good start. I don't really see him going to Detroit. I think this obvious, honestly, Buffalo. He really wanted to go to the Rangers last year, right? Like, I don't know. Has that changed since they've been booted out in the first round? Maybe it didn't work as well as he thought it would there. You know what I mean? It is kind of just like I don't really know. It really depends what he's thinking, right? Like,
Yeah, I
is it
know for
crazy to
me,
say like Pittsburgh, dude? Like if he like if he
that would
takes like
be
league minimum, like that would be sick to add him to the top six.
the only thing with Pittsburgh is like if you're Patty Kane and those in the 2010s, like you had so many battles against that Pittsburgh Penguins team. Those two teams were always the favorites to win the cup. I don't know if Patty Kane could do that and not have Chicago fans upset about him sort
That's
of going to the
fair.
other side. Like at least they don't play in the same conference.
What about like
But
New Jersey, dude?
New Jersey would be interesting. I still think Buffalo though, man. Like the guys from there, they have the most amount of cap space to give him a contract where he's not going to be
Like a
making.
1 year, like $5 million or something, or like because you
Yeah,
got
and
to
then
think he's
even
missing some time, right? So I mean, that's probably what I'd say. Like he's probably worth around that at this point, like maybe a little bit less. I don't know.
I
Like
think between
it's
three
hard.
and a
It's
half and five.
it's hard to judge, right? Like he's 34, and it's like I think the money really depends on the term, especially when you're this old.
Yeah, all around, it's going to be an interesting situation to watch going forward because nobody knows what's going on there and what team he's really looking at right now.
It's definitely
It's
going to be a good acquisition for whoever gets him. Like, there's going to be no real, unless you're signing him to like a multi-year deal. Like, there's not really a big risk. Like, I
because
think whoever wins is getting a huge addition midseason.
if Patrick Kane was like if tomorrow was trade deadline, Patrick and like somebody picked up Patrick Kane, that'd be the biggest deal of trade deadline, right? Like the
Right.
guy's the guy's a multiple cup winner. He's one of the best players from his generation. And as you said, he's still only 34. When we talk about some of these older players that are still performing, like Sidney Crosby, Malk, and Ovechkin, they're all 4 years older than this guy. Yes, he has been unhealthy, but if he can show that he's healthy and get back to being like a 70 to 90 point player in the NHL, like man, what a pickup for a team that it would be. But who knows what's going on with him right now? Of course the NHL, it's still really early on. But you know what I love about the NHL season being nice and young, Mark? It means we can have our overreactions, and who cares if they're garbage because we have nothing to go off of. So I think we get into some of these overreactions and see what we think of them. First up, the grade eight, Alexander Ovechkin. For the first time in his career, he's been held to 0 shots in 2 straight games. First of all, before we even get to the overreaction, I think that's absurd that this is the first time in his career. The guy's 38 and he hasn't had 2 games like back to back where he's had 0 shots. That's a crazy stat.
That's an insane stat.
But right now he sits at 822 career goals. Of course, the great one, Wayne Gretzky, he sits at 894. So Ovechkin, he needs 72 to tie the record and 73 to break it. He's currently 38 years old. But like, should we be worrying that it might not get done by Ovi?
I don't know. Like, I don't think so. Like, I think this might just be like a rough stretch he's going through right now, and it kind of happens to be right at the beginning of the season. Um, I feel like this is definitely an overreaction. I think if he could put up like 30 back-to-back seasons like next year and this year, and then he's putting up like what 15 to 20, and that'll get him
Maybe
there. You know what I
13.
mean?
Yeah.
What has he got? Like 3 years left on this deal. So I think at worst he's playing out the rest of this contract, right? So his worst season for goal scoring was 24, but that was in a shortened season in 2021, and that was only in 45 games. Besides that, he scored over 40 goals in every season except for 16-17, where he only had 33. So, I mean, at worst, I think if he's putting up 30, like he gets 30, 30, 15, that's going to get him there. It would definitely be a little bit disappointing if that is the case, just because of how dominant he's been goal scoring wise, especially like the last couple seasons too, like 42 last year, 50 the year before. If this is the way it's going though, like it's definitely going to be like close. You know what I mean? Like it's definitely going to make some people question whether he's able to pass that record or not. We'll get into Washington a little bit after you say your opinion on it. I'm not really that worried about it, though. I think he might just be going through a stretch. I think even if they end up being a bad team, he's still going to like easily put up 30 this year.
Yeah, if this is an overreaction, he'll be able to put up 30 this year. He'll be able to put up 30 next year. And then he'll just need 13, like 13 extra goals to break the record. It's gonna happen. The only way at this point it doesn't happen is if this guy suffers a career-ending injury before it gets done. Which, when you look at the way he's built,
Well, and the thing
I
is
don't
with
see that
him, man,
happening.
like you look at his stats, like he's barely ever been injured in his career.
Yeah. Well,
Like
the
half
guy's
of
a,
these games
the
he
guy's a
missed,
Russian beast, man.
the half of these games he's missed is because he's been suspended for refusing to go to the All-Star game.
Yeah.
And
He's
the thing is, though, is like the concern is, like I was saying, Washington's gone downhill. Like, I'd say through this season, they've looked like one of the worst teams in the NHL so far. They have not looked good whatsoever. Their only win was against Calgary, and I think it was in a shootout, am I not mistaken? Or overtime. Obviously, he hasn't scored yet this year, which is a bit of a concern. And like the not shooting thing is a little bit of a concern, considering like I'm sure there's been games where he's had like upwards of like 8 to 10 shots and he's not scored, but like he's getting the chances. You know what I mean? He's probably just running into a hot goaltender. But Washington to me has just not really been that good. I feel like if he wasn't going for this record, there'd be conversations, at
he'd
least
be getting
among like
traded.
fans and podcasters, about like them moving him maybe for a rebuild, but I don't think that's even in the question. I think they want him there. I think they want him to break the goal record as a Washington Capital. I think he wants to break this record as a Washington Capital. So I don't even think that's in the question right now. I hope for his sake, Washington's able to get a little bit better, because I just would hate to see him end his career after being so good, making the playoffs so many years straight, and then them just not being good for the rest of his career.
Yesterday, I was at work and somebody was asking me, they said, dude, like, are we at the point where we could see Ovi get traded? And basically, my response to that was, imagine going to the Hockey Hall of Fame in 50 years and they have a display of Alex Ovechkin breaking the all-time goal scoring record. And in the clip of him getting that goal, he's wearing like a Leafs jersey. Like, no, you don't trade him. I don't care how bad you are right now. I don't care if you guys are going to get the first overall pick this year. Don't trade the guy, because he's going to make history in the NHL, and you want it to be in that Washington Capitals jersey where he's played his whole career, where he's been unbelievable for the team, where he's won that Stanley Cup. Like, there's when you look at Alex Ovechkin, he's a top two player of this generation. It's Crosby and him. You can't you don't trade those players no matter how bad your team gets. I think we move
I,
on to the
I don't think he's getting moved. I
yeah,
think you're right. I don't see it.
there's no way he's going to go anywhere. Our next overreaction, I don't think this one's an overreaction personally, but goals against versus goalie issues will kill the Oilers' season. So far this season, they have a goals against average of 433 and a save percentage of 857. Not getting some great goaltending in Edmonton. Do you think this is an overreaction, or are you on board for this?
I kind of think I'm on board for this. I know Campbell played really well against Nashville a couple nights ago, but I'm just not convinced with him whatsoever. The second they gave out that contract, I thought it was a disaster. I don't think he's anywhere close to like being a starting goalie in this league. Listen, Stuart Skinner was really good last year. There's such thing as a sophomore slump, though. Like, you know what I mean?
A lot
And
of players
he
have
came
it.
into a role where last year he wasn't expected to really play as much as he did. You know what I mean? He kind of just took over Campbell's job because Campbell was that bad. I can see a situation where Skinner's like taking steps back this year, and Campbell's not really getting much better, and it's just kind of like flip-flopping between them to see how you're going to get good games out of them. If I was Edmonton personally, I would be looking right now to see how the heck you can offload that contract of Jack Campbell. You might have to attach a first round pick to it. Personally, with how their cap is, I think it might be worth it. You can sign or somehow get a younger goaltender to come in and still have a couple $1 million in cap space to do something else with your team as well, not just your goaltender. You know what I mean? I don't see the season working out well for their goaltenders. I know I had them coming in first in the division. I still think it could happen. Like they could still win their division by outscoring teams. Like they're that talented. You know what I mean? I hope Skinner doesn't have a bad season, but I'm just having this weird feeling about him that he is just not going to play up to what he did last year. And Campbell, I just don't see him rebounding at all.
Yeah, I still like the Oilers a lot, but we talked about their goaltending issues in the season preview episode. We're talking about their goaltending issues 3-4 games in now. Like they're gonna have to get this figured out, man. Because when you have the best player in the world on your team and arguably the second best player in Leon Draisaitl, you can't have I don't want to say it, but you can't have 1-2 players like wrecking their chances of getting it done in the playoffs and winning that Stanley Cup. And right now it's looking like that's going to be the outcome because their goaltending is like it's been atrocious to start the season. They haven't been able to save a beach ball so far this season. And to think that they're going to be able to go into the Stanley Cup playoffs with this goaltending tandem and be able to get it done, it's insane because yes, they have the best power play in the league. Yes, they score all these goals, but in the playoffs, we all know that the offense isn't there as much, and you have to rely a lot more on these closer, low-scoring games. You just can't do that with what they have right now in the net. You're gonna have to figure something out with Jack Campbell, as you said, whether it's giving up a first-round pick to get him off your books. For me,
buyout at the end of the season, maybe, but I mean that means you have to go through the whole season with them.
I was thinking possibly do you look at Fleury? Like, do you possibly take a look at that? But the thing is, with the buyouts that the Wild have right now, the Parise and Suter one, like, I don't think they'll want to take on their cap situation's already pretty bad. I don't think they'll want to take on a bad contract.
No, I don't think so. And plus they got Gustafsson and then they got Wallstead in the pipeline, right? So it's like unless they're planning on like buying Fleury or Campbell out if they acquire him at the end of the season, I don't really think that makes much sense for Minnesota at all. Dude, what I was thinking, if you could make this work, what about sending him to Philly and getting Hart? Because he's also a Western Canadian guy.
Yeah.
You're going to have a pretty young tandem in him and Stuart Skinner. He makes 3.9. Campbell makes 5. You're also freeing up $1 million in cap space.
You're gonna have
I don't know, man.
I
think it's interesting. I think it's really interesting to think about. There's obviously going to be other pieces, but
I like that. It's just, would Edmonton want to give up the assets to get Carter Hart back? Because if you're getting Carter Hart back in that deal, I'd imagine
and giving up Campbell, you're going to be giving up a lot.
I'd imagine you're giving up at least 2 to 3 first round picks and that, and then a prospect.
It's just interesting to think about, right? His name was out there at the beginning of the summer. Like there's been no movement on him, and I don't know. It just doesn't seem like that they really think of him that much in their future plans anymore. I think a fresh start would be really good for him as well. I think him and a Skinner tandem would be pretty interesting to see, to be quite honest. But the thing is, it's like, man, you're talking about, do they want to give up those assets? But like, it's like, man, I feel like this is the time, dude. You have to I don't know what McDavid and Draisaitl are thinking with their next contracts, right? Like, I'm sure like McDavid loves it there and whatever, but like by the time it's done, like if they're not like showing any more playoff success, like I don't know, like he might walk. How do we really know? Like, you know what I mean? Like all he wants to do is win at this point. If they're not winning, then like that's a huge concern. Like I think you got to do whatever it takes as long as like you're not like giving away way too much. Like, you know what I mean? Like making a ridiculous deal, but I think you have to look into some sort, bring in some sort of goaltender.
It's McDavid's whole career in Edmonton. They haven't been like they've never had good great goaltending. Back even back to the Peter Chiarelli days. Like Peter Chiarelli got fired basically over the contracts he gave out to his goaltenders.
Yeah, and Koskinen and
Yeah, Ken Holland comes in. He can't fix that situation now. Like it's been so many years of us talking about Edmonton, and they need to figure out what's going on in their net, and they year after year they don't figure it out. This has to be the year that they figure it out.
and
If
listen,
not,
I
it
still
could
think
look
Stuart
ugly
Skinner is a
there.
good young goalie who's got the potential to be a really good goalie. I'm just not convinced he's like that starting goalie right now yet that you're relying on for 50 to 60 games. You know what I mean? I think he's a piece of that puzzle, but I think you need another guy to come in that's like at least as good as him, if not better right now. And Campbell like is just not that whatsoever.
Yeah, they gotta figure it out over there. A team that has really caused Edmonton to look like their goaltending issues is a big problem. It's the Vancouver Canucks. Are they an elite team and will finish top three in the Pacific, or is that an overreaction?
I think saying they're an elite team is at least an overreaction, but I mean, if they continue the way they've been starting, like they could definitely finish top three in this division. Like I just wonder if the way Talkett's come in and kind of change the culture there, if this is actually starting real change in Vancouver, you know what I mean? I think the main concern for them, obviously, over time has been their defense, right? Like they've never really struggled that much to score goals. Like they got Pedersen's obviously a fantastic player. Besser seems like he's starting off really hot. Kuzmenko as well last year. You know what I mean? They've got some pieces up front that can score goals. I think it's been the back end that's been their concern a lot, right? Leaving Demko hung out to dry. But I wonder if just bringing in guys like Ian Cole and Carson Soucy this year are more like stabilizing their defense. You know what I mean? And
Same with
really
Hronek
helping them
from
out.
Detroit.
What's that?
Same with Hronek from Detroit.
Yeah,
A
exactly. Like
couple
he did come
last
over at the
year.
end of last season, but he was injured, right? Like he didn't play much at the end of that last season. And now they obviously just got Mark Friedman from Pittsburgh in that deal with Jack Rathbone. He's going to kind of be like their sixth, seventh guy. You know what I mean? But he's kind of like the type of player they need back there. He's a big guy, able to clear out the front of the net. You know what I mean? So I just wonder with these new additions on defense, Quinn Hughes is probably getting more freedom to play more offense than he has been instead of like solely relying on being like more of a two-way guy. You know what I mean? I wonder if this is kind of like Vancouver's like breakout year. Like I know we didn't have him in the playoffs, but I've been quite impressed with them, man, so far. Like they've definitely changed the way they're playing. Obviously, there's talk around their team. I don't know if you heard how like Garland changed agents and now he's like looking for a trade. I wonder what they're going to be able to get back for him. Like apparently they're looking for another D, so their defense could be looking even better in a couple weeks from now.
Yeah, for the Canucks, the biggest thing I noticed this season compared to last season and like previously is it really seems like there's been a massive change in that leadership group as well. Previously, the leadership group was a lot of the older guys, like you had Bo Horvat, JT Miller, OEL. Where now all their younger guys have taken over. Demko and net, he's looked phenomenal so far to start the season. Quinn Hughes, Elias Pettersson, like those two guys are really taking charge and leading that team. And that's the
Hughes has got the C too now, right?
like
So
that was it looks like now that they're really doing that, like that's what they were lacking in some of the previous seasons was having those top guys really step up and take in charge. And now these younger guys are doing that. And man, they're looking like a pretty good team to start off the season. Will they be able to keep it up all season long and be able to finish in that top three? I don't know, but I think my preseason take of them not making the playoffs is looking looking a little rough right now. I'll say that.
But like you said, man, like this is debatably the hardest division in the NHL. Like, there's tons of time here. Like, they could either get really good, they could fall off. I think it's going to be a battle for them either way. It's not going to be easy whatsoever. One thing I want to credit too is I think last year we saw a lot. Like, there was that whole thing with Boudreaux. You know what I mean? Like, I felt
Tanner
like he was
Pearson.
mistreated. I don't know if he'd lost the rumor whatsoever, but I've noticed since Tocchet has been there, like JT Miller's been a lot calmer. You know what I mean? Like, I wonder if he's just sat down and talked with him and saying, like, listen, you can't be having these outbursts mid-game. You can't be not trying to come back and save a goal on defense. We've seen like his lack of like effort defensively at times. He's been looking pretty solid. Like, I can't lie. You know what I mean? Obviously, he's been hated on in the past. He's a skilled player, right? He had 99 points a couple years ago. I really wonder if that's made a difference in like JT Miller's game and just like the Canucks, like overall, just the way they are, like in the dressing room. You know what I mean? Like, it just seems like this is a whole like dynamic that's changed in Vancouver.
Yeah, they're looking good so far. It's what they did to the Oilers was was a real wake up call, I think, to everybody around the NHL. Like, oh man, Vancouver, don't sleep on them too much this season. I think we should go from out west, though, make our way out east to the big team in Canada out east, which is it's the Toronto Maple Leafs. Austin Matthews, man, he's been looking pretty good to start off this season. Will he score 70 goals this season? Is it possible that we could see a 70 goal scorer in the NHL in 2023-24?
It's quite possible, man. Obviously, what he's got 6 through 3 games right now. Like,
On
obviously, he's
pace
not
for
going to continue.
164, so
I don't think he's continuing this pace all season, but he looks like he looks better than last year, man. He's showing those flashes of when he scored 60 goals a couple years ago. I think if not, he's not getting 70. He's probably getting over 60. He's probably gonna be between 60 and 70. I don't know. I don't really think this is much of an overreaction, to be quite honest, considering how good he started, but you can obviously see the other side of it as well, where he's not going to get 70 and just like tail off back to reality.
well, the big thing with Matthews too is he always like he hasn't missed a lot of time due to injuries, but he always like every season he always gets that one injury or two where he
Yeah, he's
plays
out a
through
couple
it, but
weeks or
he's not,
something.
and like he'll play through it, but he's not at 100%. So I think with him, it's really like how healthy can he stay this season, and if he's healthy all season, I don't think 70 goals is ridiculous. I think it could be done with the way that guy's shot is, and especially how much they play. I'm like, man, like the time on ice for these guys so far that this season in Leafs land is like, it's like, what are you do? What are you doing, Sheldon Keefe, man? Like, dude, it's game 3 and you're burning these guys out already. You have Austin Matthews out there for the full 2 minutes on the power play. Like, dude, Max Domi, who you bring in the offseason, and you think he's going to be a decent, like a decent part of the Leafs team this season, he's averaging like just over 10 minutes total ice time.
He has
per
not
game.
looked good to me at all.
But it's because he's hardly playing though. Like the guy can't get in a rhythm. You got to play him more than 10 minutes a game. No,
Oh, absolutely, dude. Like, he should be. He is like I think he's a great like third line guy who can play up in the top 6, and I think that's what they should be doing with him, like flip flopping 3C second left wing at times. You know what I mean? I think with the Leafs is like, yeah, they've scored a lot of goals, but like, dude, I thought I saw like Nylander and Matthews have scored 75% of their goals this year. Like, dude, like
right.
where's their depth scoring? Like that's they don't have anything right now. Like, Matthews just look fantastic, but like, I don't know. It's really early, and this could be an overreaction, but you got to be like a little bit concerned about like their depth scoring. You know what I mean? Like, Matthews isn't just going to carry them and score 65% of their goals this year. Like,
Yeah, looking at their depth right now, it's definitely worrisome.
what? Bertuzzi's got a goal. Marner's got 3 assists. He hasn't scored. Like, Tavares has got a couple. You know what I mean? But like, who else has even scored? Nyes, I don't think has a point.
Well,
Neither does Minton.
it's just a fact too of like how much the big guys are playing because they can't be playing this much come game like 50 and afterwards. They're going to be burnt out for like you're going to go into the playoffs and you're going to have all your top guys not either not healthy because they're dealing with injuries or they're just going to be out of gas, man. Like you can't have that happen. Even if you're not getting that great production like goal wise and offensively from your bottom six, you got to be able to rely on them just to throw them out there to have a good shift and gain some momentum in the game. And right now, Sheldon Keefe, it looks like he doesn't trust that bottom six at all. It looks like it looks like a beer league game where you're just running two lines the whole night, man. Like, I don't know.
And,
I don't
and I get the
understand what Sheldon
mentality
Keefe
of
does.
I get the mentality of like giving your guys the leash, like when they're playing good, play them. But I think that's more for like the third period when you're in crunch time. Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Not throughout the duration of the game. It's like, okay, well, Matthews, you got 2 goals tonight. You're playing well defensively. All right, well, you're playing 3 out of the last 5 minutes of the game or whatever. You know what I mean? So we can secure this victory. But I don't really like how much they're playing them. I agree. I think they're going to get burnt out. I get they're young, but like, I mean, they're going to carry the team. But I mean, it's just like they can't be doing it this much. You know what I mean?
I think we look at the Leafs back end, or not so much their back end, but in goaltending now, our next overreaction, Joseph Wall will take the starting job in Leafland.
I don't think this is an overreaction at all. This is the topic I
know
came
you're
up
all
with.
on board for this one, buddy.
I am on board for this, man. I am not nearly a Samsonov fan, to be quite honest with you. I don't think he's looked good at all whatsoever. He looked like a disaster against the Habs. He didn't look good against Minnesota either. He got the win in both games. Listen, besides last season, he has not really even been like an average NHL goaltender. I am totally seeing him being much worse than he was last year in a situation where Joseph Wall kind of takes over that starter's job, at least for this year. Maybe even a situation sort of like Stuart Skinner, Jack Campbell. You know what I mean? You have your guy who you think she's going to be your starter, and the younger guy kind of comes in, takes the net. I know Wall got the loss against Chicago, but I think he looked way better against Chicago than Samsonov did against Minnesota or against Montreal. I think it's very possible that you could see a struggle in net from Ilya Samsonov consistently in a situation where Joseph Wall is kind of coming in, playing much more games, and maybe taking the starter's job. I think this could be a very similar situation to in New Jersey with Akira Schmid and Vitek Vanacek. Obviously, Schmid had the net at the end of last year. He won Game 7, went into round 2. He was their guy right when they got out as well. I could see a situation there where Schmid kind of takes over for Vanacek and takes that starting job. Goalies are voodoo, man. There's a lot of them they're good one year, not great the next. There's only a certain amount that have been consistently elite throughout all these years. And I think there's a high possibility where Joseph Wall takes over Samsonov's job at some point this season.
Dude, looking at Samsonov's stats, it's the most Leafs stat. This is the most Leafs stats ever. He has a 442 goals against average. That's terrible. He has a save percentage of 839. Dude, it's even worse.
That's terrible. And he's 2-0.
Yeah, but he's 2-0. But he's 2-0 because the Leafs just outscore their opponents.
It reminds me of when they had Mrazek a couple years ago. Mrazek was 10-5 with like an 880.
I mean, hey, he's looking good for Chicago right now, but
he has, man. He looked really good against Montreal. They beat Pittsburgh opening night too. He looked pretty solid. So,
but yeah, I think Joseph Wall is going to take over the net. Even when you look at the contract talks between Samsonov and the new front office with the Leafs, like this season, it was pretty clear that Samsonov valued himself a fair bit more than what the Leafs front office
do you
did.
think that like is getting to him? Like, because more or less, like, it seemed like Toronto only wanted a year. Like, they didn't want to be like, hey, we'll give you a 4-year deal at $4 million. Like, they didn't want to commit to him past this year. And I think that he thought that, like, I had this really good season. Like, I'm still young, right? Like, I'm 25, 26. Like, commit to me. But I wonder if that's like getting to his head at all.
I think it could be, but like if you're him, you gotta look at it the way like, all right, like if you don't want to pay me, watch what I'm gonna do, and then if you're not paying me, somebody else will, because I'm gonna I'm going to play so good that
And
some
to be fair, like
team,
I think the Leafs actually made the right decision, like going with the
yeah,
1 year, because like look how it started out for him. Like he's
Jack
been like
Campbell,
debatably the worst goalie in the league.
Jack Campbell had one good year with the Leafs, and look what he got in Edmonton, and look what we were just talking about 5-10 minutes ago, right? Like you hand out that contract to Samsonov, he plays this whole season terrible, comes back next season, has a bad start. You're looking at that contract, especially when they're going to be paying Matthews what he's going to be making, Nylander if he sticks around what he's going to be making. Like you're going to be
And
looking at that
yeah,
contract and going, oh, how do we get out of this?
yeah, because say they gave him a 4x4 going into this year, and he finishes not with like an 836, but say he's like at like an 890, like then you're in a kind of similar situation where it was like they signed Mrazek, he was terrible, and they had to get rid of his contract. They obviously brought in Matt Murray. Luckily enough, he's on LTIR, but he's made like if Murray was healthy this year, he's making almost $5 million. Like he's not worth that. You know what I mean? Like I think Tree Living kind of saw that and was like kind of skeptical about giving this
Yeah.
guy like a multi-year deal. And I think they kind of approached this right, and they got him at like I think he definitely deserved that 3.5 for what he did last year. But I mean, I think going over a year was probably a good decision. Them staying like where they're at right now, and then you can kind of address it at the end of next year.
I think we move on to the Pittsburgh Penguins. Evgeny Malkin, he was saying the other day, I wish the season would just end so I could win the Hart. He's looked really good to start off the season. Father Time, he doesn't know it. Evgeny Malkin, he's going to finish the season with 100 points. Overreaction or not?
No, I don't think this is an overreaction. I could totally see him finishing like at least around that range. We always talk about like how last year, Pittsburgh didn't make the playoffs. Crosby's pissed. Like this is the first time in his career. You think Malkin's not pissed either? Like he's been here this entire time. Crosby has. He's kind of been that second fiddle to Crosby. Meanwhile, you put Malkin through his career on like pretty much any other team in the league, he's their number one center. You know what I mean? It's kind of a situation with like Crosby or with McDavid and Draisaitl right now, right? Like it's like Draisaitl's obviously fantastic. He's just playing behind like the greatest player in the league. So I think Malkin is just as pissed. To be honest, I think one thing that's really helped his game, man, him and Riley Smith look really good together. They have built some good chemistry. I am liking watching those two guys play together. Malkin as well. I like you can say Letang is a great player and he has been a great player throughout his career. Let's be real. Him and Crosby have never played with a type of player like Erik Karlsson on defense. They've never have.
Letang and prime Letang was
It is
pretty
fair,
good,
but like at this point,
they're
Karlsson's
two.
putting up like 100 points,
Yeah,
right? Like Letang's never been in really in that range. So I think all these factors are helping Malkin. I think he's just nowhere near close to done. Like this is a guy who's we talked about him tailing off a little bit over the past couple of years, like not being that top 10 center anymore. And he's still finishing over a point per game like every single year. It's just more he hasn't really played much defense. You know what I mean? And there's just some guys that have taken over him in accordance to like skill. But man, I think he could totally jump back into being like a top 10 center in the league after this year. I think he is just pissed, just like Crosby. He wants to get back into the playoffs. And I really hope this Malkin revenge tour keeps going through because I'm loving watching him play like this.
the big thing with this team too is like their power play unit is disgusting, man. I was saying it
Oh, it's
during
so good.
season preview. Like outside of Edmonton, they're gonna have the best. They're gonna have the second best power play unit in the NHL, and it's been it's been good so far to start the season. Honestly, dude, I took Malkin and Carlson in fantasy at in our little work fantasy hockey league. Dude, I'm fucking loving those pickups, man. Absolutely loving them. They're getting me the goals. They're getting me the assists. They're getting me the power play points. My fantasy team's a force to be reckoned with Evgeny Malkin taking the charge, and I'm just I'm hoping he can keep it up all season because if he has 100-point season, man, like, oof, oof.
I don't think it's out of the question. I really don't.
Next up, we have the New Jersey Devils, and our overreaction for them is the New Jersey Devils are going to regret moving on from Mackenzie Blackwood.
So this is definitely an interesting one. Obviously, he's still really young, right? Like he's only 26,
Yeah,
drafted in 2015,
high
second
draft pick.
rounder as
What's that?
He was a high draft pick.
Yeah, especially for a goalie, right? Like a second rounder for a goalie, like that's pretty high. You know what I mean? Like besides being in like the first round, I guess like that's kind of like a second round is almost like a first round for a goalie, in my opinion, at least. 42nd overall. He came into the NHL his first couple of years, man. Like he's solid. 918, 915, 902. The last 2 years in Jersey, though, were a struggle for him. Like lots of injuries, only playing 25 games, like high 800 save percentage. I understand why they moved on from him, especially having Akira Schmid come up. I'm just convinced that he is like nowhere near done. I think I'm totally seeing him rebounding. He's looked great so far this season with San Jose. I just think eventually, like New Jersey might regret moving on from this guy. I don't know. I just don't think that Vanacek is the answer, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
I would have liked them more to run with like a Schmid Blackwood pairing more than like a Schmid Vanacek pairing. I just think at his age, like Blackwood has shown more flashes in his career than Vanacek has, to be quite honest. And I think New Jersey might regret this eventually, but at the same time, it's like, is this a guy who needed the change of scenery? Like, would he still be doing, like, would he be playing like he is now in New Jersey, right? Like, some guys, they need that change of scenery to get going. But they might look back and regret this. I think they're personally happy with their goalie tandem right now, but I'm just not convinced Vanacek's the answer. I think Blackwood kind of has a higher ceiling than him. But they also got Schmid too, right? Who's really young and seems like he's got a bright future as well.
Yeah, see, I think it's a bit of an overreaction. Like, I think they might regret it a little bit in the future, but I don't think it's in 5 years they're gonna be looking back like, oh my God, how did we make that deal? How did we move on from that guy? It might be like, oh well, you know what, with Blackwood, maybe we're a bit of a better team, maybe we're a bit more secure in the net, but I don't think they're gonna be really stressing, losing sleep over this deal, to be honest. But Blackwood, he's looked good so far this season.
I'm happy he's able to rebound. Like,
yeah, it's only been 2 games, but it's with San Jose, and that team is going to be finishing with a top 5,
like,
top 3 pick this season. So
he stopped 50 of 51 against Colorado, man. He kept them in. I maybe him just like facing a lot of shots and actually like staying healthy, like is going to help kind of resurrect his career. And maybe in 2 years, if he's playing good, he'll be a free agent, could sign with another team. You know what I mean? And be on like a better team. And I just don't think Blackwood's anywhere close to like being out of this league or anything like that.
26.
I don't think he's like an AHL caliber goalie or anything like that. I think he's just had a couple of rough seasons with injury, needs this opportunity at San Jose. And right now he's been proving him. He's been good. I had him on our Chirpin' Pigeons YouTube channel as a top 10 worst contract sign this offseason. But I mean, he's just shoving that in my face right now.
That's Asian poorly. That's not looking good for you, buddy.
Not whatsoever. It was
that or me just ripping Vancouver, calling them the most mid team I've ever seen in my life. What's a worse take? That's all we have for this week, though. We covered a decent bit, covered the injuries, some of the breaking news, covered our overreactions. I'm looking forward for next week. Next week we should have a lot more news and a decent bit more clarity on everything going around the NHL. So it's been a fun week. It's going to continue to get better as the season goes on. That's all we have for this week's episode of the NHL Recap Show, though. We'll be back next week with more takes and stories from around the NHL. Thanks for tuning in.